I'll give you $100,000 if you serve me in Chinese. Sergeant Mitchell's voice sliced through the Golden Lotus restaurant like a blade. $100 bills fell onto Marcus's tray one by one, creating a grotesque spectacle that made every conversation stop instantly. Marcus Thompson was 34 and never imagined his parole would lead him to waiting tables at an upscale Chinese restaurant in downtown Chicago. There he was, ex-inmate number 847392, balancing dim sum plates for people who wouldn't even look him in the eye. Sergeant Richard Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his 48-year police career stamped in the cruel smile dominating his face. "What's wrong, boy? $100,000 not enough." He gestured to 3 superior officers at his table. "My colleagues will judge whether your Chinese is convincing enough." Marcus stared at the money. $100,000. More than he'd earn in 5 years waiting tables. Enough to pay for the appeals lawyer who could clear his name. Enough to get his 7-year-old daughter out of that failing public school where she was bullied for having a criminal father. But he knew this wasn't about money. This was about power. About Sergeant Mitchell proving to his superiors he was in control, that he could humiliate an ex-con simply because he could. "You know what's best," Mitchell continued, clapping slowly. "When you fail, you'll kneel right here and apologize for wasting our time. I bet my pension you don't even know how to say thank you in Chinese." The laughter from the superior officers was awkward, forced. Captain Rodriguez, an older man with gold-rimmed glasses, frowned with visible discomfort. Marcus took a deep breath. For a brief moment, he thought about his old life, when he was Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, when he led international intelligence operations, when his name meant excellence in multilingual investigations. 4 years ago, everything collapsed. A botched undercover operation. Planted evidence. A corrupt captain who needed a scapegoat. Marcus was convicted of evidence fabrication, a crime he never committed. 3.5 years in Stateville State Prison. "I accept," Marcus said, his voice firmer than expected. Mitchell's smile faltered. "What's that?" "I accept your proposal, Sergeant Mitchell. I'll serve you in Chinese, and when I'm done, you'll pay me the $100,000 right here in front of everyone." Mitchell clapped slowly. "Perfect. Then let's make this more interesting." He turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, you've just witnessed typical arrogance. This employee actually believes he can impress us." Captain Rodriguez adjusted his glasses uncomfortably. "Mitchell, maybe this would be better." No, Rodriguez," Mitchell interrupted. "You need to understand how things work here. These people live in a fantasy world." He gestured dismissively at Marcus. "I bet he watched some kung fu movies and thinks he can impress you with random words." Lieutenant Colonel James Carter from New York frowned. "This is getting uncomfortable, Mitchell." "Uncomfortable?" Mitchell laughed. "This is educational. You want to work with me on the federal task force? You need to understand reality." He pointed at Marcus. "This man probably didn't even finish high school before falling into crime. He works here because he's good for nothing else." Marcus remained motionless, but inside, memories transported him 4 years back. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, degree in International Relations from Northwestern University, graduate studies in Asian Studies from Georgetown, specialist in multilingual interrogations, fluent in 9 languages, guest speaker at the FBI Academy. Captain Sarah Chun, the 3rd superior officer who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Maybe we should give him a real chance." "A real chance?" Mitchell laughed. "Sarah, you're too kind. But look at him. This man carries trays for a living. He probably can barely afford rent for a 1-room apartment." He wasn't wrong. Marcus shared a tiny apartment with 2 other parolees, worked 2 jobs, waiter at night, janitor during the day. He slept 5 hours a night when lucky. Every penny went to his legal defense fund and child support for Sophie. But Mitchell didn't know Marcus still had access to academic portals through a former professor who believed in his innocence. That he studied computational linguistics in the early morning hours. That he corresponded with researchers in Beijing in fluent Mandarin. That his thesis on neural language processing had been cited in over 200 international papers. "Let's establish the rules clearly," Mitchell announced. "If he can make a convincing order in Chinese, not random words, but a complete menu presentation with detailed explanations, I'll pay the 100 grand. When he fails, and he will fail spectacularly, he'll kneel right here and apologize to every person in this restaurant for wasting our time. And he'll publicly admit he tried to deceive us, that he's nothing but a desperate imposter seeking attention. Marcus watched everything with the calm of someone who had already lost far more than his dignity. 4 years of waiting tables had taught him there are times to retreat and times to push forward. This was a time to push forward. I accept all conditions, he said calmly. Mitchell turned to the officers, arms open. Gentlemen, you're about to witness a valuable lesson on the difference between real confidence and delusion. He had no idea that every cruel word was fueling a force growing in the silence. A determination forged by 4 years of humiliation that was about to find its release in the most devastating way possible. As everyone settled in to watch what they thought would be just another display of power over the vulnerable, no one noticed the almost imperceptible glimmer of satisfaction passing through Marcus's eyes. If you're enjoying this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will prove that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. Mitchell clapped slowly. Perfect. Then let's make this even more interesting. He turned to the restaurant owner, Mr. Chun, who stood nervously by the kitchen. Bring the authentic Beijing menu, the one we use for diplomats from Shanghai. Mr. Chun hesitated. Sir, that menu has over 40 dishes with very specific technical descriptions. Perfect, Mitchell interrupted loudly. If our language expert really knows Chinese, he won't have trouble with a few technical details, right? Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Mitchell, this is becoming cruel. Cruel. Mitchell's voice rose. Rodriguez, you don't understand. This is pedagogy. These people need to learn their limits. He pointed at Marcus. Look at him. He still maintains that arrogant posture. He still believes he can fool us. What Mitchell didn't know was that at that precise moment, Marcus was mentally reviewing his master's thesis on dialectal variations in contemporary Mandarin. 4 years ago, he'd spent 8 months in Beijing as an intelligence liaison, studying regional terminology specifically for undercover operations in Chinese criminal networks. His supervisor, Colonel Patricia Hayes, had been brutally demanding. Agent Thompson, she'd say in Mandarin, if you can't explain a Sichuan dish using proper Beijing tones, how do you expect to infiltrate a triad meeting in Guangzhou? Marcus had spent sleepless nights in Beijing, memorizing not just vocabulary but cultural nuances, regional variations, criminal slang that only native speakers knew. He'd presented intelligence briefings in fluent Mandarin to panels of Chinese liaison officers who questioned him for hours without a single word of English. While we wait for the menu, Mitchell continued, how about he tells us a little about his experience with languages? He made exaggerated air quotes. Where exactly did you learn Chinese? Watching movies with subtitles. Lieutenant Colonel Carter spoke up. Mitchell, may I ask a question? Why is this so important to you? Because, Mitchell leaned back arrogantly, you're considering me for the Federal Task Force leadership. You need to understand how I operate, how I identify people who try to pass themselves off as something they're not. He gestured dramatically. This man is clearly lying about his abilities. And if I can't spot such an obvious lie, how can you trust my judgment for operations? Sarah Chun shook her head. That makes no sense, Mitchell. Even if he doesn't know Chinese, that has nothing to do with your operational competence. It has everything to do with it, Mitchell slammed his fist on the table. It's about integrity, about honesty, about not tolerating people who try to deceive me. What none of them realized was that while Mitchell spoke, Marcus was observing every detail. In the last 18 months serving at Golden Lotus, he developed a peculiar skill, reading people, especially powerful, arrogant people. Richard Mitchell was an open book. He constantly mentioned his international connections, always mispronouncing Chinese names, always making completely wrong cultural references. Last month, Marcus had served his table when Mitchell tried to impress Korean officials by discussing ancient Chinese customs, confusing dynasties, mixing up regions, getting everything embarrassingly wrong. The man was a cultural fraud disguised as an international expert. Ah, here it is, Mitchell announced when a waiter brought an elegant leather-bound menu. Special menu straight from our Beijing consultants. 40 authentic dishes, each with full technical descriptions. He opened it and his expression changed slightly. For a second, He seemed less confident. Well, there are a lot of characters here, he muttered, staring at the complex Chinese script. Rodriguez leaned over. Can I see? No, Mitchell quickly closed the menu. He needs to do this alone, without help. He handed it to Marcus. Go ahead, expert. Describe 5 different dishes in Chinese, in detail. Marcus took the menu, opened to the first page, and almost smiled. It was exactly the type of menu he'd studied exhaustively during his Beijing assignment. He immediately recognized several Sichuan specialties he'd not only studied but ordered during countless undercover dinners with Chinese intelligence contacts. Can I choose which dishes? He asked calmly. Of course, Mitchell laughed. Choose the easiest ones if you want. You're going to fail anyway. What Mitchell couldn't imagine was that Marcus was mentally flipping through his memory of the presentation he'd given at the FBI's International Training Center on the evolution of culinary terminology in operational Mandarin. He defended that presentation to an audience of 200 federal agents, including linguistics experts and cultural attaches. Before I begin, Marcus said, looking directly at Sarah Chun, I'd like to confirm something with you officers. Are any of you fluent in Mandarin? Rodriguez blinked in surprise. I speak a little Spanish, but that's it. Why do you ask? Mitchell laughed loudly. See? You're already making excuses. Oh, you guys won't understand anyway, he mimicked in a childish voice. Pathetic. Actually, Marcus continued calmly, I asked because I want to ensure there will be at least one person qualified to evaluate my pronunciation, intonation, and correct use of tones. Sarah Chun sat up straight. I'm fluent, she said slowly. I was born in San Francisco, but I lived in Taiwan for 15 years. My Mandarin is native level. Mitchell hesitated for the first time. Well, that's of course perfect, but inside he was beginning to feel a twinge of nervousness. Until that moment, Marcus's unshakable confidence had been merely irritating. Now it was starting to seem genuine. There's one more thing, Marcus continued. You mentioned this is about integrity and honesty. May I suggest we make it more interesting? How so? Mitchell asked, his voice slightly less confident. If I can not only describe 5 dishes in Mandarin but also explain their regional origins, preparation techniques, and cultural significance, all in fluent Chinese, you double the bet to $200,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving. And if I fail, Marcus continued, in addition to kneeling and apologizing, I'll work for free at this restaurant for 6 months. No pay. Just to prove I understand consequences. Mitchell stared at him. For a moment, he seemed to want to refuse, but with all eyes on him, especially those of the superior officers evaluating him for promotion, he couldn't appear cowardly. 200,000, he repeated slowly, his voice cracking slightly. Captain Chun tried to intervene. This has gone too far. I accept, Mitchell announced, extending his hand to Marcus. 200 grand if you succeed. 6 months of slave labor if you fail. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Deal. As Mitchell prepared to witness what he believed would be the ultimate humiliation of a mere ex-con waiter, Marcus took a deep breath. The menu lay open before him. The officers leaned forward. The entire restaurant held its breath. And in that moment, something shifted in the room, a subtle change in atmosphere that only Sarah Chun seemed to notice. The calm before a storm that would leave nothing standing in its wake. Marcus held the menu with steady hands, scanning the complex characters with practiced ease. But he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked up at Mitchell with an expression that made the sergeant shift uncomfortably. Before I begin, Sergeant Mitchell, I want to ask you something. Marcus's voice was calm, almost conversational. You mentioned integrity. You said this is about honesty. So let me be honest with you. Mitchell frowned. What game are you playing now? No game. I just want you to understand that when I succeed, and I will succeed, it won't be luck. It won't be a trick. It will be because you made the same mistake everyone makes. Marcus paused. You looked at me and saw only what you wanted to see. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, suddenly interested. What do you mean? He means nothing, Mitchell interrupted defensively. He's stalling because he's scared. Just start speaking or admit you can't. But Sarah Chun raised her hand. Let him speak, Mitchell. I want to hear this. Marcus nodded gratefully toward her. 4 years ago, I was arrested. Convicted. Sent to prison. My career destroyed, my reputation shattered, my family torn apart. His voice remained steady, emotionless. Everyone who looked at me after that saw only one thing: criminal. Ex-con. Failure. Exactly what you are, Mitchell sneered. What I became, Marcus corrected. Not what I was. Not what I am. He glanced down at the menu again. You see, Sergeant, prison teaches you something valuable. It teaches you that people's assumptions are their weakness, not yours. Lieutenant Colonel Carter spoke up, his tone sharp. You're saying you have relevant experience? Real training. I'm saying, Marcus replied carefully, that before my conviction, I had a different life. A life where languages weren't just hobbies, they were tools. Essential tools. Mitchell's face reddened. Oh, here we go. The sob story. The I was somebody once speech. He turned to the other officers. This is what they all do. They create elaborate backstories to justify their failures. Then let me prove it's not a backstory, Marcus said quietly. He looked directly at Sarah Chun. Captain Chun, you said you lived in Taiwan for 15 years. What city? She blinked, surprised. Taipei. Why? Northern or Southern District? Shilin District. Near the night markets. Marcus smiled slightly. Then you know the difference between Ange. He said the words in perfect Chinese, and Sarah's eyes widened. You just distinguished between Taiwanese Mandarin and mainland Mandarin, she said slowly. With proper pronunciation. That's not something you learn from movies. Mitchell slammed his hand on the table. So he knows a few phrases. That doesn't prove anything. But Captain Rodriguez was watching Marcus with renewed interest. What did you do before prison, Mr. Thompson? Your real profession. Marcus hesitated. This was the moment. Revealing too much could backfire. Mitchell might find a way to disqualify him. But revealing too little would waste this opportunity. I worked in intelligence, he said finally. International operations. Languages were required, not optional. Intelligence. Mitchell's laugh was harsh. You expect us to believe you were some kind of spy? That's the most ridiculous. I didn't say spy, Marcus interrupted calmly. I said intelligence. There's a difference. Sarah Chun was typing rapidly on her phone under the table. Marcus noticed, but said nothing. She was checking his story, exactly what he'd hoped someone would do. This is insane, Mitchell continued, but there was something different in his voice now. A crack in the confidence. You're telling us that a supposed intelligence officer is now serving tables? Do you hear how stupid that sounds? It sounds, Lieutenant Colonel Carter said slowly, like someone who was either fired for incompetence or framed. He looked at Marcus with sharp eyes. Which was it? Does it matter? Marcus replied. I was convicted. I served my time. The courts decided my guilt. Whether I was actually guilty or not is irrelevant to this bet. It's very relevant, Rodriguez said. Because if you're telling the truth about your background, then Mitchell just made a $200,000 bet against a professional linguist. Mitchell's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Someone would have told me. His record would show. My record shows exactly what it's supposed to show, Marcus said. Ex-convict. Parole conditions. Current employment. Nothing about my education or former career. That information isn't public. Sarah Chun looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. Mitchell, we need to talk. Privately. No, Mitchell said sharply. No private conversations. We have a bet. He either performs or he doesn't. But his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his water glass. Marcus watched the fear beginning to bloom in Mitchell's eyes, and for the first time in 4 years, he felt something close to satisfaction. Not revenge. He'd learned in prison that revenge was empty. But justice. The sweet, cold taste of justice. There's something else you should know, Marcus continued. The reason I accepted this bet isn't just the money. It's because 18 months ago, I served your table for the first time. Do you remember? Mitchell stared at him blankly. I don't remember waiters. Exactly. You don't remember people you consider beneath you. Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. That night, you were entertaining clients from Hong Kong. You spent 20 minutes explaining Chinese culture to them, getting almost every fact wrong. Mixing up dynasties. Confusing Cantonese with Mandarin. They were too polite to correct you. Sarah Chun sucked in a sharp breath. I remember that dinner. I was there. You're right, they were mortified but said nothing. After you left, Marcus continued, one of them asked me in Cantonese if all American officers were that ignorant. I told him no, just the loudest ones. Mitchell shot to his feet. That's a lie. You're making that up. Am I? Marcus remained seated, completely calm. The client's name was David Wong, managing director of Pacific Trade Associates. He left me a $200 tip and his business card. Prove it, Mitchell demanded. Marcus reached into his wallet and placed a business card on the table. David Wong's name was printed in both English and Chinese characters. Captain Rodriguez picked up the card, examined it, then looked at Mitchell. This is legitimate. I know this company. They work with federal trade commissions. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Mitchell stood frozen, his face cycling through shades of red and white. So here's what's going to happen, Marcus said quietly. I'm going to describe those 5 dishes in Mandarin. Perfect Mandarin. And you're going to pay me $200,000. And you, he looked directly at Mitchell, are going to learn that destroying someone's career doesn't destroy their competence. It just makes them invisible. And invisible people see everything. Sarah Chun stood up slowly. Mitchell, I think you should concede now. Before this gets worse. Worse. Mitchell's voice cracked. How can it get worse? Marcus smiled coldly. Captain Chun just finished looking up my background on the law enforcement database. Didn't you, Captain? Sarah nodded slowly. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson. Decorated intelligence officer. Specialization in Asian criminal networks. Fluent in 9 languages. Conviction overturned 3 months ago on appeal due to prosecutorial misconduct. Full exoneration pending final paperwork. The silence that followed was deafening. Mitchell's face went completely white. Overturned. The detective who planted evidence confessed, Marcus said quietly. My conviction is being vacated. I'm not an ex-con, Sergeant Mitchell. I'm an exonerated officer whose career you just publicly mocked. And as those words hung in the air like a death sentence, everyone in that restaurant realized they weren't watching a bet anymore. They were watching the complete dismantling of a man who'd built his authority on cruelty, and chosen the wrong target. Mitchell's hand trembled as he reached for the table to steady himself. That's impossible. I would have been notified. The department would have. Notified you? Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through Mitchell's panic like ice. Why would they notify you? You're not involved in my case. You're just a sergeant who happens to eat at the same restaurant where I work. He paused. Or were you involved, Sergeant Mitchell? The color drained completely from Mitchell's face. Captain Rodriguez stood up slowly, his expression hardening. Mitchell, did you know about this man's background when you started this? I know, I swear, I just thought he was. You thought he was what? Sarah Chen's voice was sharp now. An easy target? Someone you could humiliate without consequences. Lieutenant Colonel Carter pulled out his phone. I'm calling headquarters. This needs to be documented immediately. Wait, please, Mitchell's voice cracked. Let's just forget the whole thing. I'll apologize, we'll leave quietly. No, Marcus said firmly. You made a bet. $200,000. In front of all these witnesses. He gestured around the restaurant. You said this was about integrity and honesty. So let's see yours. Mitchell's jaw clenched. Fine. Say your Chinese words. Let's get this over with. Marcus opened the menu, his movements deliberate and calm. When he spoke, his voice transformed completely. The Chicago accent vanished, replaced by the precise, educated tones of Beijing Mandarin. The words flowed like water, each tone perfect, each syllable precisely placed. Sarah Chen's eyes widened immediately. She leaned forward, completely focused. Marcus continued in flawless Mandarin, describing the first dish. "My God," Sarah whispered in English. "He's not just speaking Mandarin. He's explaining culinary philosophy with vocabulary that most native speakers don't know." Mitchell's hands gripped the table. "That has to be memorized. He's just reciting." Marcus switched without pause to Cantonese, his accent shifting to authentic Hong Kong pronunciation. Sarah gasped. Perfect Cantonese. Authentic Hong Kong accent. "Mitchell, do you understand what you're hearing?" But Marcus wasn't finished. He shifted to Taiwanese Mandarin, then to Sichuan dialect, then back to formal Beijing Mandarin, each transition seamless, each accent authentic. He described 5 dishes in meticulous detail, their ingredients, preparation methods, regional origins, cultural significance, and historical context. He spoke for 7 uninterrupted minutes, and the restaurant remained absolutely silent except for his voice. When he finally stopped, placing the menu down, Sarah Chun was shaking her head in disbelief. That was the most impressive demonstration of linguistic competence I've ever witnessed. He didn't just speak Chinese, he performed a masterclass in dialectology. Rodriguez stared at Mitchell. "You bet $200,000 against this?" Mitchell's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No words came out. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. He pulled out his phone and opened a folder. 18 months ago, I started documenting every interaction with you, Sergeant Mitchell. Every racist comment. Every demeaning gesture. Every time you snapped your fingers at me like I was a dog." He held up the phone. Video recordings. Audio files. 37 separate incidents of workplace harassment, discrimination, and abuse. All time-stamped. All backed up to cloud storage. Mitchell's face went from white to gray. "You were recording me?" "Illinois is a one-party consent state," Marcus replied. "I only needed my own permission to record our interactions. And since you were so confident I was just a stupid ex-con, you never thought to watch what you said." Sarah Chun took the phone, scrolling through the files. Her expression darkened with each video. "Mitchell, this is career-ending material. Multiple violations of conduct regulations, discrimination policies." "I want to make a deal," Mitchell blurted out desperately. "Please, I have a family. I'm 3 years from retirement." "You should have thought about that," Lieutenant Colonel Carter said coldly, "before you decided to publicly torture someone for entertainment." He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize on behalf of the department. This behavior is inexcusable." "It's Lieutenant Thompson," Sarah corrected. "His rank was never officially stripped, only suspended pending the appeal outcome." Rodriguez pulled out his wallet. "Mitchell, pay the man. Now." "I don't have $200,000 in cash." "Then write a check," Carter snapped. "Immediately." With shaking hands, Mitchell pulled out his checkbook. The scratch of pen on paper was the only sound in the restaurant as he wrote out the amount. When he tried to hand it to Marcus, his hand was trembling so badly the check almost fell. Marcus took it calmly, examined it, then folded it and put it in his pocket. "Now apologize," Sarah said firmly. "To everyone here. Publicly." Mitchell looked around at the dozens of faces watching him, customers who'd witnessed his cruelty, staff members he belittled, officers who were evaluating him for promotion. "I apologize," he whispered. "Louder," Marcus said quietly. "You were loud enough when you were mocking me. Be loud enough now." "I apologize." Mitchell shouted, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. I was cruel. I abused my authority. I'm sorry." The restaurant remained silent. No one clapped. No one moved. They simply watched as a man who'd built his career on intimidation crumbled under the weight of his own arrogance. Marcus stood up slowly, buttoning his waiter's jacket with dignity. "You know what the worst part is, Mitchell? I would have helped you if you'd asked. If you'd treated me like a human being instead of a target. I would have gladly shared what I know." He looked at Sarah Chun. "Captain, those files are yours if you want them. For the formal investigation." She nodded. I'll need your full statement. And Lieutenant Thompson, welcome back to the force. Officially. As Marcus walked toward the exit, every person in that restaurant, customers, staff, even the kitchen workers who'd emerged to watch, stood up. Not to applaud. Not to cheer. But to show respect. Silent acknowledgement that they'd witnessed something rare, justice served with precision and dignity. Mitchell remained seated, his head in his hands, as the three superior officers gathered their belongings in disgusted silence. The federal task force position he'd been interviewing for was gone. His reputation was destroyed. And worst of all, he'd done it to himself. The Golden Lotus would talk about this night for years. But for Marcus, it was simply the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. A chapter where his competence, his dignity, and his truth could no longer be hidden behind someone else's prejudice. 14 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in front of a classroom at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. His title was displayed on the door, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, Director of Multilingual Intelligence Operations. He earned $168,000 annually, had full benefits restored, and had become the youngest director in the Academy's history. His daughter Sophie now attended a prestigious private school in Washington, D.C., living with him in a comfortable apartment near the Capitol. The check from Mitchell had paid for the best lawyers who expedited his exoneration. But more importantly, it had funded something else, a non-profit organization called Second Chance Linguists, providing language training and job placement for formerly incarcerated individuals. Your background doesn't define your capability, Marcus told his class of new recruits. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. In the back of the room, Captain Sarachin smiled. She'd personally recruited Marcus back into federal service and had been promoted to deputy director after her role in exposing Mitchell's misconduct became public. Sergeant Richard Mitchell hadn't been as fortunate. The investigation Sarah launched uncovered a pattern of behavior spanning 15 years, dozens of complaints that had been ignored or buried, victims too afraid to speak up against a decorated officer. He was forced into early retirement without full benefits. His wife divorced him, taking custody of their teenage children who refused to speak to him. The video of his humiliation at the Golden Lotus had been viewed over 40 million times, turning him into a cautionary tale about prejudice and abuse of power. Mitchell now worked security at a shopping mall in suburban Indiana, earning $32,000 a year. He'd moved there to escape recognition, but occasionally someone would recognize him from the viral video. Last month, he'd seen Marcus on the national news, interviewed as an expert on international criminal linguistics for a major terrorism case. Mitchell had turned off the television and sat in darkness, understanding too late that destroying someone doesn't make you powerful. It just reveals how weak you truly are. David Wong, the Hong Kong businessman who'd given Marcus his card 18 months earlier, had become a close friend and mentor. His company now contracted exclusively with Marcus's nonprofit, providing translation services that gave formerly incarcerated linguists a path back to legitimate careers. You could have destroyed Mitchell completely, David said over dinner one evening in Mandarin. Why didn't you? Marcus replied in the same language, because destruction is easy. Building something meaningful from pain, that's the real victory. The Golden Lotus restaurant had transformed too. Mr. Chun, the owner, had promoted Marcus's story as an example of hidden talent and second chances. Business had tripled. He'd opened 2 more locations and hired 5 ex-convicts, giving them opportunities others wouldn't. That night changed everything, Mr. Chin told reporters. We learned that the person serving your food might be smarter than the person eating it. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost everything. Lieutenant Colonel Carter had reached out personally to apologize and offer Marcus a position on the federal task force, the same position Mitchell had been interviewing for. Marcus accepted, using it as a platform to reform how law enforcement treated rehabilitated offenders. Captain Rodriguez retired but stayed in touch, often telling the story of that night to young officers as a lesson in humility. Check your assumptions at the door, he'd say. The person you're underestimating today might be the person you need tomorrow. On the first anniversary of that night, Marcus returned to the Golden Lotus with Sophie. She was 8 now, excelling in school, no longer bullied, no longer ashamed of her father. "Dad, why did that policeman hate you?" she asked as they ate dim sum. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "He didn't hate me, sweetheart. He hated what he thought I represented, everything he feared about losing control. He needed to feel powerful, and the easiest way to feel powerful is to make others feel small. But you weren't small. No, Marcus smiled. I never was. I just let him think I was until the right moment. That check for $200,000 hung framed in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that patience, preparation, and competence will always outlast arrogance and cruelty. Mitchell had tried to humiliate him based on assumptions about race, class, and criminal history. Instead, he'd given Marcus the platform to prove that redemption isn't just possible, it's inevitable for those who refuse to be defined by their lowest moment. Marcus learned that the best revenge isn't returning cruelty with cruelty. It's building a life so successful, so meaningful, that your oppressor's pettiness becomes irrelevant. It's transforming years of humiliation into fuel for achievement that no prejudiced person could have imagined. Every week, he received emails from formerly incarcerated people who'd seen his story. People who'd been rejected from jobs, denied opportunities, told they'd never amount to anything. He responded to every single one, offering advice, connections, hope. You tried to break me, Marcus said quietly to an empty room one evening, thinking of Mitchell. But you just proved that my strength was never dependent on your approval. My competence was never validated by your recognition. My worth was never determined by your judgment. He looked at the class schedule for next week, teaching advanced Mandarin to federal agents, consulting on international cases, mentoring young officers who'd faced discrimination. Life had tried to silence him. The system had tried to crush him. Prejudice had tried to define him. But Marcus had responded with excellence, patience, and unshakable dignity. If this story of justice and transformation has inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories proving that our value isn't measured by our worst day or someone else's limited perception, but by our refusal to let anyone else write our final chapter. Mitchell spent the rest of his life as a cautionary tale. Marcus spent the rest of his as proof that the human spirit, backed by real competence and moral courage, is unstoppable. The difference between them wasn't intelligence or education or even opportunity.